that's also when I was going around.
But there must be a version that does images and another one that does it's also, is that for unchecked?
Yeah.
You can zero down.
Yeah, that's why I
But
thought.
I mean, I don't use it, but I know that.
I don't think they're going to
I recently Justin will be and that's why I get my daughter. Yeah, he does. He does.
Why?
I've seen it. I believe it because I go to ChatGPT, like with some bar questions, like, how do I do this, how do I do that? And I'll look at it and I'll go, well, I know that's wrong. Because that's not even in that package and all of that. But I would say, yeah, that's about right. And half the time it helps me.
Yeah, nice.
If you're asking me my fingertips, that's a different story.
Sure.
Then they get a little
Do you need help?
It has helped me with some sort of smaller scripts.
You need help, Justin?
End up getting a bunch of
My goal is to get to by the time I get to my job is safe. I have job security before this meeting takes off.
I have gotten some
I haven't actually tried to do anything like more sophisticated, like and like someone gives me a model.
You want me to try this side?
This model.
Actually,
I haven't even tried to do anything.
And then like assignments on ChatGPT and it's like just an
always slanted. So I think that the end of this is you're appearing with it.
if you let's say you start with like 3 items, you like you give me like 20 stories.
Sorry.
Generate words for other emotion words.
Liquor spill. It's on the side there.
Like I kind of put something on Google, I just looked at ChatGPT. But not even need
Come here.
It was just things like, what's a synonym for blah?
Like that's
Doing so well.
So I don't talk about language writing. Some people swear by it as an editor. Every time I put some of my text in it, you say like,
Sorry.
they're like, I haven't had a lot of
No.
I know.
Yeah, well, it's 2 sorts of 150, so you'll probably say like 45
Oh, I didn't.
I don't know what to do about it.
What could do about it? Did it happen?
I can stop that.
Down.
Floor.
I'm not sure.
You already went up. Yeah.
Before I even noticed that,
I think when they talk about like ordering houses, I think that's what they're for. Like Spider-Man, there's really sharp skin on your hands. It's like a plunger. Yeah. Very good, yeah. Oh, idea. Do you have a preference? Spaghetti or red sauce or basil sauce?
How are you guys doing?
Oh, really? Thanks.
No, I'm nothing against red sauce, so if you happen to be using red sauce.
No. We just, Amelia, so I just made like a kind of pesto without the so I guess technically not pesto. And there was no cheese either.
Can't you say pesto the same?
where there's like people not selling food anymore, but it was like family house. It's a public house.
I feel like people have a lot of fun. But it's just based on all.
So basically, you can sort of quite confident
like they
I did. Hopefully we'll get fresh stuff at the farmer's market. I love that farmer's market.
Really?
No, yeah, I was like, oh yeah, like we have to like.
But there was like the Jensen
Like
like
covers on it and kitchen, but like it's weird. It's not like it was built by like a family.
Like up to 1978, you can have that thing.
Yeah, and tiles, apparently it's like a 90s, you can have glazing and stuff like that. Because that's even more sort of, it's hard to get the right.
Our house is up this morning too. Up to 60.
Well, that's when it was completely outlawed. I mean,
Nobody's gonna play that.
like already it's getting there. After 1950, people kind of knew, I think, that I then in 78 it was actually outlawed. But that doesn't mean it wasn't used even after 1978. People might still have changed.
Exactly.
So you don't actually know for sure.
So a month ago I would have said we
I was thinking about that.
horrible. I mean, we just, like everything was but unfortunately, everything's
Blood tests were all good.
blood tests are all fine. We know our
You're
blood
gonna probably not renew it, but you're not
We're actually, I mean, the good thing is the landlord is very good. And so he was, so basically, like, he basically said, we can leave.
Oh,
yeah, exactly, and we're, that's
No, I was not.
really motivating.
Oh no, he's just gonna press the button. Yeah, he's not gonna go up and climb.
Yeah, because we both did the housing, like that's what it's, I mean, it's really ugly, it's super crazy.
But having corporate food has been very helpful. But yeah, he wanted like a nice house, and we should have it because of his salary. But it's interesting because when you have them off, it takes out of my salary. Because they take the housing fee out of my salary, but my salary doesn't cover our taxes.
So you have to pay to work at UCSB. That's
I don't get it.
Yeah. So I don't know how that would, but
if I have to pay our mortgage.
We locked eyes.
I would be very important.
I could have, but I had said hi to him like 2 seconds prior to that, which is why I left. I mean, I just like keep saying hi to Barry. Yeah. I felt like I had to say something, so I just told him that I was going to
Hi everyone. It says opening remarks, but I don't really have any, so I hope everyone enjoyed lunch, and thank you for our food team for procuring that and for giving us something other than Woodstocks. Yay! And tomorrow we have different food, so be excited for that. And we're gonna just jump right in to our next speaker, Chuyi. This might be in our top cutest babies. So Chuyi, as you can see, forever, one of the friendliest faces in our department, perhaps unsurprisingly studies friendship. Chuyi will be telling us specifically about children's inferences about friendship based on reputation protection. Chuyi has had pretty hands-on experience with his research subjects because he worked for 2 years as a preschool teacher before starting his PhD. Outside of his research, Chuyi has a very diverse set of interests, including golfing, playing guitar, and collecting quotes. So if you're ever at a loss for words or need an epigraph for a chapter or a paper, make sure to go find him. He's also an excellent cook, and he aspires to one day own a house with a kitchen large enough for his talents. Please welcome Chuyi.
Hi everyone, welcome back from lunch. As you can see from my baby picture, I also really like food and eating lunch in particular, so thank you to all the third years for organizing lunch today.
Sorry, the Zoom closed.
Great. So I first want to start off by thinking about something that humans seemingly all possess, which is a fundamental need for belonging. And this need motivates us to foster social connections. And one way that we can facilitate these social connections is by making ourselves desirable social partners that others would want to connect with. One important way that we can do this is by improving our own reputation or others' perceptions and opinions of oneself. While the majority of developmental work on reputation has focused on children's understanding of reputation and how they care about reputation, we were interested in whether children make inferences about friendship from observing individuals who manage each other's reputations. So for example, if Alex protects Jaden's reputation, do we think that Alex and Jaden are friends or affiliated with each other? In order for children to make these kinds of social inferences, it requires them to understand and care about reputations, as well as be able to track socially relevant information that's related to these kinds of relationships. So children have a wide understanding and concern for reputation. Some work by Hill and Pillow found that children understand that reputations are shared opinions held by one's peers, and that these opinions are derived from direct interactions with others. Other work has continued to build on this, showing that children not only understand what reputations are, but they themselves are concerned about their own reputations. So for example, children as young as 3 to 4 years of age were more likely to demonstrate that they could activate a toy that the experimenter previously saw them fail to activate, over choosing to teach something new about a different toy, suggesting that children wanted to correct the experimenter's initial perceptions of their incompetence. Additionally, children who were told that they have a reputation for being smart were more likely to teach to uphold this reputation, highlighting that children's concerns for their own reputation may even motivate different kinds of immoral behavior. And there's some emerging work that shows that children are concerned about other people's reputations, such that they donate more when their in-group's donation is public information, showing that children are concerned not only for themselves, but for others' reputations as well. So there does seem to be evidence that children do in fact care and understand what reputations are. Now we also need to know that children understand what friendships are and are able to track socially relevant information to infer these kinds of relationships. Classic studies by Brian Bigelow and colleagues probed children's early understandings and expectations of friendship, highlighting different themes of helping and sharing commonalities. And other more recent work has shown that children use several different cues to infer friendship between agents, and that children privilege some cues over others. So for example, children think that possessing arbitrary similarities, like coincidentally wearing the same outfit as somebody else, is a relatively weak cue of friendship compared to if you spent a lot of time together or are loyal to each other. And this creates a sort of hierarchical structure such that some cues are stronger indicators of friendship than others. Additionally, from this more recent work, they found that older children seem to attend some of these better cues of propinquity or playing with each other and loyalty, whereas younger children are more likely to attend to some of these weaker cues like similarity. So this work ultimately shows that children are able to infer friendship between agents by using important social cues. So to answer our research question, do children use reputation management to infer friendship? We sought to integrate these two bodies of literature and conducted an initial study. But before I get into the details of what these studies were, I first want to operationalize here what we mean by reputation management. So reputation management is a broad term used to categorize all sorts of different behaviors that influence reputation, but the particular behavior that we were interested in is this idea of private correction. So for example, here's Alex and Jaden again, and Jaden tells everybody here in the room that Stegosaurus ate grass, but Alex knows that she's wrong. Instead of telling Jaden she's wrong in front of everybody here at MiniCon, Alex pulls Jaden aside into the hallway and tells her that she's wrong there, where nobody else can see them. This is an instance of private correction. By telling Jaden she's wrong in private, Alex is hiding Jaden's incompetence from other social observers, thereby protecting Jaden's reputation. In our study, we wanted to know if kids thought Alex and Jaden were friends after viewing this kind of interaction. So in study 1, 253 4 to 12-year-old children were read a story in which a central character, like Alex, corrects one classmate in public and then a different classmate in private. We then asked children who they thought the central character was better friends with, the publicly corrected character or the privately corrected character. And we hypothesized that children would think that the privately corrected classmate is the better friend since their reputation was the one that's being protected. So before I show you the results, I first want to orient you to our graph. On the x-axis is children's reported age in years, and on the y-axis is children's responses. So if children thought that the privately corrected character was the better friend, that would be a value of 1, so at the top of the y-axis. And if children thought that the publicly corrected character was the better friend, then that would be a value of 0. As hypothesized, children reasoned that the central character was better friends with the privately corrected character, or the character whose reputation was being protected, and with age, children were more likely to see and choose that the privately corrected character was the better friend. When we were designing the study, we also thought about a couple different reasons why children might actually respond in this way. They could be responding as we predicted by using the reputational consequences to infer friendship, but alternatively, we know from past friendship literature that children use cues of propinquity or spending a lot of time together or in close proximity to each other to infer friendship. So perhaps here, children are attending to the fact that these characters are interacting closely with each other rather than the reputational consequences themselves. In this case, in the study, we also included a control condition to test this alternative hypothesis, in which instead of telling someone that they are wrong, the central character tells them that they are right, and we call this the affirming condition. So if children's friendship inferences do stem from the reputational consequences, then children in the affirming condition should now think that the publicly affirmed character is the better friend, since their reputation is now being promoted. And so this is what we see. We found that children thought that the now public character was the better friend, and this effect increased with age. And these results seem to suggest that it is something about the reputation management interaction and the reputational consequences that are driving the effects seen here, rather than just the location in which the characters are interacting in. So now I'd like to bring us back to the friendship hierarchy for a second. While we found some evidence that children use reputation management to infer friendship, we know that children do not view all friendship cues equally. From our first study, it's still a bit unclear whether they think that reputation management is a good friendship cue at all. And so we wanted to follow up on this first study by trying to situate private correction in this already existing hierarchy and within the already existing literature on children's understanding of friendship. We did this by asking the question, do children see reputation management as a strong friendship cue? In order to do this, we wanted to compare private correction to each of these 3 cues here on the left. So for example, is Alex better friends with Jaden, who she corrected in private, or a different character who she shares a similarity cue with, a propinquity cue with, or a loyalty cue with? If children see private correction as a relatively weak cue of friendship, then they might be at chance picking between private correction and cues of similarity in this direct comparison. And if children think that private correction is a pretty good cue of friendship, then they might be more likely to pick private correction over cues of similarity and be at chance picking between private correction and cues of propinquity and cues of loyalty. We hypothesized that with age, children would be more likely to view private correction as a good cue of friendship, like propinquity and loyalty, and a better cue than arbitrary similarity, as we had it. And we know that younger children seem to attend to some of these weaker cues, whereas older children seem to attend to some of these stronger cues. So we might see this developmental change in what cues children actually privilege. So in study 2, 272 4 to 12-year-old children were randomly assigned into one of 3 conditions: the similarity condition, the play or propinquity condition, and the loyalty condition. Children were read a story very similar to that of study 1, but with one small change. So after observing the central character Alex correct somebody in public and a different character in private, they then saw Alex share a friendship cue with the publicly corrected character. So for example, here in the similarity condition, the central character Alex coincidentally possessed the same colored ball as the publicly corrected character Taylor. In the play condition, the central character chooses to play with the publicly corrected character. And in the loyalty condition, the central character chooses to share a shovel with the publicly corrected character. We then asked children who they thought the central character was better friends with again, much like in study 1, the person who was corrected in private or the person who shared the other friendship cue. And lastly, at the end of the study, we included a check question asking if children could explicitly remember which character was corrected in public. The study seemed surprisingly difficult for children to follow, such that about 60% actually passed this check. And so today I'll just be showing you the results for this passing subset. So first, let's look at children's responses across the age span. On the x-axis, again, is children's reported age in years, and on the y-axis is children's responses collapsed across all conditions. So if children thought that the privately corrected character was the better friend, that would be a value of 1 again. And if children thought that the other character of the other friendship cue was the better friend, then that would be a value of 0. We found a significant main effective age such that with it, children were more likely to choose the character corrected in private as the better friend compared to all of the other friendship cues. Now let's look at children's responses within each condition. So here's a graph of the proportion of children's responses, either picking the privately corrected character in blue or the other friendship cue in red. In the similarity condition, we see that children were significantly more likely to pick the privately corrected character as the better friend compared to similarity. But in the loyalty and the play conditions, children were at chance picking between private correction and these other two cues. These null results for the loyalty and play condition seem to suggest that the children think that private correction is as good of a friendship cue as these two other ones. And there were also significant differences between the conditions, such that children in the similarity condition were more likely to pick private correction over children in the loyalty and play conditions. So to summarize, in study 1, we found that children used reputation management to infer friendship, and this increased with age. And in study 2, we found that with age, children were more likely to see reputation management as a good cue of friendship, and that children reasoned reputation management to be as good of a friendship cue as loyalty and play, and a better friendship cue than similarity. So now I'd like to take a moment to broaden the scope a little bit, thinking more about why this might be particularly interesting and important. First, our findings suggest that children find behaviors that protect and promote each other's reputations to be socially informative. Additionally, our work contributes to the broader literature on children's understanding of friendship by identifying a different kind of friendship cue founded on social perceptions, and one which might slot nicely into this already existing hierarchy. And lastly, this work opens up several new doors for scientific investigation, such as what would motivate someone to manage other people's reputations, and how would someone react if someone else were to manage their own reputation. So with that being said, I'd like to thank my advisor, Dr. Zoe Liberman, my fellow lab mates, Bailey, Liz, Shreya, Oya, and Chen, and all of our wonderful RAs in the Social Cognitive Development Lab here. And lastly, I want to thank all of the families and children who participated in our studies at the Santa Barbara Zoo and Moxie Science Museum. Thank you. Yeah, David?
Yeah, thank you for a really great talk, really clear, really nice structure. I'm just curious, for these kinds of studies, especially with younger children, the order of presentation of the stimuli is always tricky. Mm-hmm. And I'm just curious if you could kind of talk us through how you thought about dealing with that. If you're pitting multiple cues, how do you deal with the order of presentation, and how did you deal with that?
Yeah, thank you for your question. Yeah, it always seems when you're designing developmental studies, you have to be very careful about all these things. One of the things that I didn't mention is all of the fun things that we did, in fact, counterbalance. So, sorry, flipping all the way back through. But for example, one of the things that we did counterbalance is in which cue was presented first, either the private correction or these other cues. So in study 1, we either showed the public correction interaction first, and then the private interaction, or vice versa, so the private interaction first, and then the public interaction. We also varied, which cue here was shown first, private correction or the other friendship cue. And by this counterbalancing, and also by looking at it statistically, there weren't any statistical findings based off which cue was presented first, but it is always tricky. We also counterbalanced which character here was the privately corrected character or the other friendship cue character, so whether it's Jaden or Taylor, what color the ball is, we know which character is being played with, etc., etc. Thank you. Niels?
I had a question because you talk about how strong a cue something is for friendship, right? But then because you use forced choice, you kind of force them to say that one of them is a friend or is not a friend. In a sense, I wonder, and I know you don't have data on this, but what do you think would happen if instead of saying who are they better friends with, you would ask, is Alex friends with Jaden? Is Alex friends with Taylor? What do you think? Like, you know, asking for each of them separately, what do you think would happen?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Niels. I think it's always tricky when working with children. If you give them non-forced choice questions, they could respond seemingly in a billion different ways. One of the ways that, or one of the reasons why we use forced choice methods in this case was to try to piece apart whether there is something that children privilege more than others. If we were to ask them whether they thought that Alex is friends with Jaden, if they said yes or no, and if they thought that Alex was friends with Taylor, yes or no, I think there's some great possibility that they would say Alex is friends with both of them. And but there's a bunch of different reasons why they might actually respond like that. They might just say that because it's generally nice to be friends with everybody, and that's something that they've just learned over, through schooling or just by existing in the world. And so we were trying to just create and tease apart what the strength of these relationships were, and that's why we choose the forced choice methods. But I think it is really interesting if we were to just open it up with a very open-ended question, what children would say.
No, I think you're right. That probably would say that they're friends with everyone. Yeah, that's it, right?
Okay, you can find Chui in his office if you have further questions for him.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Chui. It's been wonderful. Right, next up we have another developmental psychologist, Oya Serbest. Oya has many talents, including being a gifted pianist and a polyglot. She speaks Turkish, English, German, and is learning Spanish and Bulgarian. Don't be offended if Oya doesn't recognize you in the hallways, because recognizing faces is her biggest weakness. However, if you quote a Harry Potter line to her, she probably will recognize it because she's seen all 8 movies more than 20 times. Lucky for her in her research, she is great at communicating with children, which is something that she picked up when she taught piano to kids, and incidentally, this led her to pursue developmental psychology. Inspired by her own bicultural upbringing and her first-hand experience with migration, Oya will be telling us about children's expectations of behaviors from religious groups across cultures. Please give a hand to Oya.
So hello, today I will present you my project titled Early Biases in Faith, a comparative study of Turkish and American children. So this project is basically on children's expectations regarding the role of religion in guiding behavior. But in particular, I investigated whether children expect atheists to be more likely to violate norms than theists, and whether these expectations vary based on culture and or family religiosity. So, a large and growing body of research highlights that children understand social world as divided into social groups starting from very early in life. So, as seen with other social groups, children demonstrate preferences for their own religious in-group rather than out-group, and also they expect people in their religious group to act in pro-social ways. On the other hand, a separate body of adult literature suggests that religion might operate somewhat differently than other types of social group cues, particularly in terms of directing behavioral expectations. So that is, regardless of their own religious beliefs, adults may expect religious people to be more prosocial than non-religious people. For example, on this graph, you will see a cross-cultural finding conducted in 13 diverse countries with more than 3,000 participants. On the x-axis, you will see degree of belief in God, and on the y-axis, you will see error rates, but basically higher scores indicate less prosociality expectations. So you can see that regardless of how much they believe in God, on the x-axis, people expect prosocial behaviors less from atheists compared to theists. However, overall, taking all this into account, because most developmental research on behavioral expectations focused on children from religious backgrounds, it is unclear whether children's expectations were due to general in-group bias or due to a broader expectations that religious people are basically more prosocial. So, children are initially socialized into religion and religious group by their family or trusted others in their close circle. So, children's beliefs typically mirror those of their parents and their close circle. Indeed, past research has shown that children's belief in religious entities increases with parent religiosity. However, in addition to individual families differ in religious practices or beliefs, children grow up in cultures that vary profoundly in terms of the typical religious practices of its members. In our study, we tested children from two cultures with very different religious practices: the United States, a sample collected from Santa Barbara, and Turkey. So these cultures vary in terms of basically the representations of religious groups initially. Basically, there are many other differences, but this is one of the main differences, with Turkey having one very dominant religious group. On the other hand, US has more religious diversity. In detail, in Turkey, more than 90% of people identify themselves as Muslim, around 5% identify themselves as religiously unaffiliated, and around 2% identify themselves with other religions. On the other hand, in the US, 60% of people identify themselves as Christian, around 30% of American people identify themselves as religiously unaffiliated, and around 66% of American people affiliate with other religions. So, therefore, testing children from both religious and non-religious backgrounds in these two populations would allow us to investigate whether children have a widespread expectations that atheists will violate norms, and or whether their own religious background and their culture influence their expectations. So this brings us to the current study. We asked two main questions. Do children expect the atheists to be more likely to violate norms? And what are the roles of family religiosity and culture in these developing expectations? So basically, in order to answer these two questions, we introduced children to theist and atheist characters throughout our study, and we asked which of these characters had broken a social norm. Our participants were 274 children from 6 to 12 years of age. In Turkey, we had 73 participants. The mean age was 8.5, and most parents identified themselves as Muslim, with the ratio of 74%. On the other hand, 12% of the parents identified themselves as non-religious in our Turkish sample. In the US, we had 201 participants. The mean age was very similar, it was 8.7, but this time, as we expected, 42% of parents identified themselves as Christian, and again 42% of them identified themselves as non-religious. Now I will talk more about our procedure. So before the testing trials, we read the following introduction paragraph to children, which would familiarize them with the content of the game. We read them. I'm going to introduce some children to you and ask questions about them. Some of the children believe that there is a God, and some of the children believe that there is no God. I'll tell you about these children and ask you to guess who did what. You can point to the picture of the child who you think did each thing. After this introduction paragraph, our testing trials began. In total, we had 4 trials, and in each of them, we introduced children to character pairs with conflicting religious beliefs, such as this child believes that there is a God, and this child believes that there is no God. And then after the character introduction, we introduced them a norm violation, such as one of these child pushed someone on the playground. Then we asked their expectation regarding the norm violator, as who do you think did that? And we also asked how sure they were with their answer using a 2-point sureness scale. The little circle means I'm very sure, and the big circle means they're very sure. And importantly, we used both of these questions to compute our dependent variable, which is named expectancy score. So we tried to turn a categorical outcome variable into a continuous variable. We also created our own family religiosity index to capture background religiosity of the children. We used 3 questions from our parent survey. The first question we used was worship frequency, measured on 1 to 7, 7-item Likert scale from never to more than once a week. The second question we used was self-perceived religiosity, again measured on a 7-item scale from not at all religious to very religious. And the last question we used to create our index was parental talk on religious matters with the child, this time measured on a 5-item scale from 1 to 5. So basically these questions were initially answered separately, and we standardized them separately and then took an average of them to create one composite score for each child, and we call this score family religiosity score. Importantly, the t-test showed that the mean of the distribution of family religiosity did not differ between Turkey and United States. So in both cultures, the mean of family religiosity is around 0. And higher scores will indicate children from more religious backgrounds in this index. So now, let's check what our data shows. We conducted linear mixed model analysis on R, and here you will see separate graphs for culture. On the left-hand side, you will see Turkish data, and on the right-hand side, you will see American data. And on the x-axis, you will see age from 6 to 12, and on the y-axis, you will see expectancy score. The higher scores will indicate more norm violation expectations from atheists. You will also see different lines for family religiosity. The darker colors will refer to children from more religious backgrounds, more religious families. And lastly, you will see a dashed line. So this dashed line refers to chance level. Basically, above chance level scores will refer to norm violation expectations from atheists. So, overall, in both cultures, even the youngest children expected norm violations from atheists above chance level. However, with age, children are socialized into broader culture as well. Overall, we see that compared to younger children, older children are more homogeneous in their expectations. That is, younger children's expectations varied based on family religiosity. However, these differences decrease with age, leading to very homogeneous expectations during older ages. Specifically, in Turkey, less religious children end up mimicking more religious children. So they expected norm violations from atheists more with age. On the other hand, in the US, more religious children end up mimicking less religious children, such that they expected norm violations less from atheists with age. Importantly, Turkish children from more religious families and American children from less religious families did not change their ideas with age. Overall, regardless of this socialization pattern, we can still conclude that in both cultures, children generally believe that atheists are more likely to violate norms than theists. So now I will briefly summarize and discuss our findings. So these results revealed an early association of atheists with norm-breaking behaviors, supporting the idea that we might have early biases regardless of our ideology or culture. However, we also find a clear effect of socialization. Family religiosity impacted younger children's expectations, but these differences reduced with age, suggesting that children are socialized into a broader cultural mindset with age. Specifically, remember, we found that less religious Turkish children and more religious American children were the ones who changed their behavioral expectations from atheists and aligned their views with their peers. Lastly, I will propose a future direction considering a limitation in our study. So even though our data suggests that atheists are associated with norm-breaking behaviors both in Turkey and in the US, despite different representations of religious groups, religiosity itself is still considered to be an important norm in both cultures, such that even children report religiosity as a very important part of Turkish and American identities. So, thus, an important future direction would be to conduct this research in a country, in a culture where religiosity is not considered as the ultimate norm in their society, such as China. This would then allow us to test whether this bias towards atheists during childhood is a widespread but still a cultural bias, or an automatic and maybe an innate bias as suggested by Jervis and colleagues. So, lastly, thank you so much for listening to me, and many thanks to my advisor Zoe Lieberman, and many thanks to Social Cognitive Development Lab for their invaluable emotional support throughout these 2 years. And thank you so much to, thanks to Zoo and Moxie for connecting us with little scientists there. And lastly, thanks to my previous institution and laboratory, Boğaziçi University, for helping me with the Turkish part of data. So that was all. Thank you so much.
Nancy, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, my dear, I didn't hear you. Sorry. Great job and so interesting. I'm wondering, since you only gave kids one piece of information, I'm wondering, even at a young age, just conversational norms and maxims assume that if you're telling me something, it must be relevant. So since you only told them whether they believed in God or not and not anything else, do you think there's a little bit of a desire to say, oh, they must have told me something that must be relevant, and so therefore I'm going to use that information? If you had given them two pieces of information about the kids, would they have used something else that they thought might be relevant in judging whether the kid was kind of a good kid or not? So just wondering what you thought about that.
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, we really tried to start from the very basic design to first understand whether children really distinguish between belief in God versus belief in no God. So in Turkey, we didn't have that condition here in the US, but in Turkey we actually we introduced them different character pairs as well, who had for example, both of them were theists, and then we check if children really distinguish between theist versus theist comparison versus theist versus atheist comparison. So this was our starting point, and children really distinguished theist versus theist versus theist versus atheist comparisons in Turkey. Unfortunately, we couldn't add that kind of a condition here because basically we couldn't find an appropriate word to put against God, because God is such a general concept here in the US. It was not the case in Turkey, so it was a bit easier. But yeah, so based on my intuitions, based on the Turkish data, I think children have a nuanced understanding of different types of religious groups. But I agree that we just priming them with the belief in God might somewhat guide their expectations, but I think, still this was a very strong expectation, and we really controlled for their background religiosity as well, so I think we kind of controlled for their familiarity with those concepts as well. So yeah, but it's still a very legit question. so you asked, yeah, so you compare between spirituality and religiosity, right?
Yeah.
Or okay, so we just consider religiosity, and we just use the religiosity related questions when calculating the family religiosity index, because I think the current literature is still a bit mixed about the spirituality part of the not religiosity but belief. So we actually asked this question in the US as well, and it showed high correlation with religiosity. But like in other cultures, spirituality is a very mixed concept, so we didn't want to include that one in Turkey because I think it's not a, I don't know, I feel like most people are really not familiar with this concept at all. But here it showed like a very high correlation with religiosity. So I actually think that yeah, I don't know. So yeah. So we actually use two different types of social norms. We ask both moral norms and conventional norms. We use this as a between subject variable in both cultures. So in our main analysis, we had results for those norm specific expectations as well, but overall they were still above chance level. There were some very interesting culture-based different expectations on different norm types, but they were not super clear to us for now. So maybe in as a future direction, we can work more to understand those norm specific expectations. But overall, it showed a very similar pattern to what I showed here. So for both moral and conventional norms in both cultures and across all age groups, children expect each of those violations from atheists, basically.
Yeah, that was a great talk. Thanks so much for it. So my question is more about background of the parents, like their social status as well as their maybe income, that might have some correlation with the religiosity. And when you think about it, when you go to school, you basically meet with almost all types of people. And if I remember correctly, the curves start becoming closer at the school age. So is that really linear, or do you see actually a big jump there? And could the other factors than just religious background explain some of the results?
So in both cultures, most of our participants were from middle to upper SES. We asked this question, and more recent surveys showed that at least in Turkey, I'm not that sure about the US, but at least in Turkey, religiosity is not super correlated with family income, because religiosity is such a prevalent concept in Turkey. So I think it's not super related to, at least in Turkey, but in the US, I'm not that sure. But yeah, definitely. Of course, we collect data from zoo and also from science museum, so it's very plausible that maybe our participants were from for example, less sensitive or less religious part of the population. But still, if we find this kind of a strong effect in that kind of a less sensitive and maybe more secular population, so it feels to me that maybe this effect would be much stronger if we could recruit them as well.
Okay, let's give a final round of applause. Next up we have Asa Young, who will be discussing brain and body synchronization, which sounds like it's something out of a science fiction book. And indeed, Asa's fascination with neuroscience began with the sci-fi books that his dad gave him growing up. Asa is a dedicated academic who dreams of one day having a faculty job, and is actually so dedicated that if he weren't in the PhD, he would be applying to grad school again, which I'm not sure we would all be making that case. Asa has many interests outside of the lab, including singing karaoke and barbecuing, And rumor has it he also moonlights as a SoundCloud rapper. I'll let you find that on your own. Asa is sure to entertain us today, especially considering his background as a former theater kid who was voted most likely to brighten your day and best actor in high school. So no pressure at all, Asa. Let's give him a big round of applause.
Thank you, Ava. I appreciate the introduction. I've been trying to bury my former life as a SoundCloud rapper, and so it's deep. That's right. Cool. All right. Well, my name is Asa Young, and I am presenting on Sink or Swim, cross-frequency coupling between brain and bodies, excuse me. Start that one more time. Between brain and body rhythms is modulated by stress. So the study involves a concurrent simultaneous scan between the brain, EEG, the heart, ECG, the breath using respiratory effort, and the stomach using EGG. Now these systems are emphatically rhythmic, producing their set of oscillations, and there's been a wealth of research over the last decade or so that has been looking at coupling or synchrony or communication between these different rhythms. Now, synchrony has typically been regarded as a lateral affair between rhythms of similar frequency, though the research that we'll be diving into today is synchrony between oscillators of varying frequency within the brain, and then also between the brain and its multitudinous organs. So synchrony can be a bit of a catch-all term. Let's go ahead and define that. When we record an electrode, in this case electrode F8 sitting across the right temple of the brain, we could filter it down to an oscillator of choice. In this case, we selected the alpha band, typically about 10 hertz, 10 cycles per second, predominant when you are in a waking state. Now, we can describe this oscillation along three primary dimensions. We can describe it in frequency, the cycling rate, how fast it is, typically in cycles per second. In this case, this alpha band that we're seeing is about 9.71 cycles per second, 9.71 hertz. We can describe it in amplitude, how loud or intense a signal is. And we can describe it also in phase, which is the process of its waveform, which is in the peak, the trough, and somewhere in between. Now, synchrony amongst oscillators of varying frequency can manifest as a combination of any of these three characteristics, though the two most well-studied and functionally relevant types of cross-frequency coupling are one, phase amplitude coupling, whereby the phase of a low-frequency oscillation modulates the amplitude of a high-frequency oscillation such that a slow oscillator scaffolds, using its waveform, the excitability of a fast rhythm. And then there's also phase-phase coupling, whereby two oscillators achieve just that. They couple their phases together. Now, there is, though, a hidden premise to phase-phase coupling, and that is the necessity of a integer multiple relationship between their frequencies, whether it's instantaneous or averaged. Now, for example, within the illustration, the slow oscillation meets the fast oscillation on every fourth cycle. Now, this increases the stability of phase-phase coupling by increasing the incidence of phase meetings. So this 4-to-1 relationship, a harmonic relationship, can really rephrase phase-phase coupling as phase-phase coupling via harmonic locking, whereby two oscillators achieve a harmonic relationship between their frequencies. And what's very interesting, though, is that the EEG and the cardiovascular oscillations are uniquely structured to promote this type of synchrony. The middle frequencies of each of the 5 primary EEG bands, heart rate, and breathing frequency, are all doubles or quadruples of each other. So the middle frequency of gamma is a double that of beta, beta of alpha, all the way down to delta, the heart rate, and heart rate to your breathing frequencies. And so that's what we're going to be studying today, is the relationship between these rhythms here, your heart, your breath, and your brain, and a secondary analysis where we look at the relationship between your brain and your stomach. So, like I mentioned, a lot of this research has been taking place at a resting state level, finding out that synchrony does in fact occur between your organs and your brain, but this study will be looking at it in a state-dependent nature. So how is it that a synchrony can change within a single individual through various tasks? And the tasks that we selected are one, a resonant breathing task whereby the participant was instructed to time their breaths to a 10-second timer. So that is the inhale, the hold, and the exhale all in 10 seconds. A common component of contemplative practices, we included a resting state recording where they were instructed to engage in unguided thought, maintain a relaxed and still posture, and we selected an arithmetic task where they were instructed to count backwards from 1,000 by sevens and restart from 1,000 if they lost their place or reached the end of the vector. Now, the construct that we were looking to target with these three conditions was that of task-related stress. And when we piloted this and collected stress reports, we confirmed our gradient. The resonant breathing task was a de-stressing task. The rest was a neutral variable, neutral baseline, and the arithmetic task was a stressful task. And so, using this organization of conditions, this is how we're going to analyze the effect of task-related stress on brain-body synchrony. So, we had 23 healthy neurotypical UCSB students that participated. They were absent of neuropsychiatric, functional gastrointestinal, or cardiovascular illness. Really the picture-perfect model of health. And even split between males and females, mean age 24 and a half. And yeah, that's what we tested on. Quite a few people in this room, actually, that we tested on. So, as for processing each of our signals, I'll save the nitty-gritty of the very fun and long and arduous math that I had to do, and I'll instead try to provide you with an intuition as to what we did. So, for phase amplitude coupling, that is the synchrony between a low frequency oscillator's phase and a high frequency oscillator's amplitude, we used the mean vector approach, where we extracted the amplitude time series of each EEG band and the phase time series of the respiration and phase oscillators respectively, and we paired them up. And we took the phase information in radians and polar coordinates, and we remapped them to Cartesian coordinates, so that each phase angle was then remapped to an angle on a circle. And then the distance between each angle and the origin was the amplitude of that paired EEG band. And so if phase amplitude coupling was present, and phase and amplitude consistently aligned, then this would shift that circle away from the origin. But if phase amplitude coupling was indeed not present, and there was a uniform distribution of phase and amplitude, that would cancel out and refocus that circle across the origin. Now, for our second signal, that of harmonic locking, the incidence of harmonic ratios between neighboring pairs of oscillators, we first went into electrodes and paired up oscillators by neighboring frequency. So gamma and beta, beta and alpha, and in this case, what we're seeing is an alpha time series and a beta time series. We extracted their time series and performed element-wise division to generate a time series of instantaneous frequency ratios, wherein the y-axis was the number of cycles of the fast oscillation for every one of the slow. From there, we defined a value that was a harmonic, wherein, in this case, alpha achieved 2 cycles for every one of the theta cycles, and we calculated it as a percentage of time within electrodes within participants across conditions. So, for the results, well, first draw your attention to the color bar axis on the bottom, how we're going to be interpreting the results. Like I said earlier, I've restructured the conditions such that 1 equals resonant breathing, 2 equals rest, 3 equals arithmetic. So for every unit increase in x, that is a unit increase in task-related stress. A negative t-value over here shows a negative association with stress, so a suppression via state stress, and positive being an enhancement of positive association via state stress. And so I'll be presenting a number of topographical plots. Because there are so many results, we'll focus on large trends, and so let's concentrate on the valence of the color, and 2, the magnitude or the strength of the effect. So moving through each pair of oscillators as the effect on their incidence of harmonic pairs, we're looking at gamma and beta, beta and alpha, alpha and theta, theta and delta and heart rate, and then here are our significant clusters. So this analysis shows that the degree to which 2 oscillators will align their frequencies with their neighbors is linearly enhanced by state stress as a function of state stress. Now, not plotted here because it wasn't a topographical plot, but this was also true for heart rate and breathing frequencies, meaning that the four of the five EEG bands, heart rate and breathing frequency all engaged in this type of cross-frequency coupling, whereby they align their frequencies with their neighbors. Now, next analysis, that of the phase amplitude coupling analysis, will start with the relationship between gastric phase and EEG amplitude. Same color bar axis, and moving through each oscillator. We have gamma, we have beta, alpha, theta, and delta. We're seeing a large-scale suppression of synchrony between gastric cycles and the brain. And now if you're sitting quite close, you'll notice that the area where in this effect is strongest are electrodes F4 and F8, electrode positions that are consistent with insular localization, a region largely responsible for you being able to perceive or interocept the internal state of your body, meaning that this region that's responsible for you being able to feel what's going on inside is receiving the greatest suppression of information from the viscera. Now, the next analysis, the analysis of phase amplitude coupling between respiration phase, your breath, and EEG amplitude, gamma, beta, alpha, theta, and delta, and our significant clusters. We're seeing the exact opposite effect. Like the harmonic locking analysis, the relationship between breath and brain is linearly enhanced by state stress, a complete dissociation and a reversal of the effects that we're seeing up here. And I think this comparison really makes the story incredibly interesting, but more on that in a second. It brings us to our central findings. Central finding number 1, cardiovascular brain cross-frequency coupling is linearly enhanced by state stress. We find these in 2 analyses. Number 1, 4 of the 5 EEG bands, heart rate, and breathing frequency increasingly align their frequencies such that they are harmonics of their neighbors as a function of state stress. And we find it in 2, the respiration brain phase amplitude coupling analysis, also linearly enhanced by state stress, though the effect was largely localized to the low frequency EEG bands. And the second finding that makes all this incredibly interesting is that gastric brain phase amplitude coupling, the suppression of this synchrony as a function of state stress. Evidence of functional dissociation between cardiovascular and impaired brain interaction as a function of state stress, fully consistent with our divisions of parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous systems. Now, for our implications, implication 1. We looked at state-related stress, but what does this look like in an individual that is traumatically or chronically stressed? And on top of that, if the organs in the brain are communicating, and this does appear to be functional, but what happens if either end is compromised? What we find is that a dysfunction of the brain or dysfunction of the body is frequently comorbid. In fact, some of our very common and frequent pairings are traumatic stress and gut inflammation, anxiety and cardiovascular disease, or panic with hyperventilation. What does synchrony or communication look like when either or both ends are compromised? And next, what other dimensions may we use to describe brain-body synchrony? One very interesting, very easy one is interoceptive sensitivity. Whether trait, how sensitive are you to your body on average, or having an individual direct their internal eye to those signals of the body, how would that affect communication between these 2 systems? And or another phenomenological facet, the effect of affect, happy versus sad versus neutral. What is the effect that may render upon cross-frequency coupling? Data of which is being collected by my honor students, so we hope to have that prepared soon. And last but not least, and perhaps my favorite implication of all, is that given the functional dissociation of cardiovascular and impaired systems, perhaps reframing brain-body synchrony not as a dialogue between the brain and its body, but rather a forum involving multiple interlocutors whose stage presence waxes and wanes according to external drivers. Now, with that, I'd like to thank my wonderful team of collaborators, Steve Baumgart, Marissa Erickson, Alan Macy, Justin Riddle, Sam Hunt, and Jonathan Schooler. Special thanks to Steve Baumgart, without whose funding this project would not be possible, and very special thanks to the soon-to-be Mrs. Young, without whose love and support my career would not be possible. Thank you.
So, great talk. I wanted to ask about, if you were to give
Wonderful question. I think it's across really two discussions, right? We have one, interoception, the ability to perceive the internal state of the body, to perceive the stomach and perceive the viscera, so on and so forth. And this has been found to be linearly associated with the degree to coupling between these two systems. So we have that, that's the easiest one and the most well-founded one. But then we have the second one, of which you notion, and a bit of a notion that we carry on within MetaLab is that of the effect of gut feelings, whether that is intuition or information that we don't exactly have conscious access to. Are we finding a perhaps substrate whereby these lower level systems can feed us information not yet available at these higher conscious levels, or we also could be falling for a funny play on words. But we are working on that, and so to be updated. Yeah. So very strong relationship between psychological stress and dysbiosis or disturbed peristalsis or gastric frequency. Now, there's two directions to that. We have one, you contract gut inflammation that increases your sensitivity to punishment and rewards, that molds your phenomenology. Then you also have the other version, which you are encountering some psychological stress, and then that downstream effect will cause your stomach to start producing a number of chemicals that increases inflammation or increases gut distress. Bidirectional relationship there. There was this very interesting study in mice where they stimulated the stomach electrically and found changes across the network that was quite analogous to this fMRI gastric network, this phase locking network between the bulge signal and the stomach signals, and found some neuronal electrical changes across this network, though we couldn't really ask the rat how they were feeling. But yeah, to be updated as well. Yeah, excellent question. So in terms of, I only know this in terms of the harmonic locking analysis. So a team in 2019 measured EEG, EKG, and breathing frequency and found that these, so they specifically looked at the alpha band heart rate and breathing frequency, and they found that during rest, synchrony amongst these three oscillators increased, but when they were asleep, they were fully decoupled. Specifically, neural oscillations fully decoupled from physiological oscillations. Perhaps as a function of you not trying to act out your dreams or trying to tune out some of that interoceptive information. They were kind of soft in their implications there. But yeah, during sleep, these two systems are decoupled, at least within that type of analysis. In terms of, for example, like the stomach to brain analysis, that is a bit more novel, so not yet tested. Yeah, it was physiological frequency modulation mediates or modulates a great deal of our analysis. Let's see if we can come back to this. So, in terms of what within the body could have changed, in the brain that could have changed to explain these things, one thing that did change and was statistically significant was the actual frequency of these organs. And so the gastric cycle typically seen at 20-second rhythms, 0.05 hertz, and you have breath at a variable rate. These frequencies did change as a function of our stress gradient, and when that frequency, for example, of the stomach cycles was included in this analysis, it ameliorated the statistical significance of condition, meaning that it was likely that this gradient here affected the peristalsis, or at least the frequency of gastric cycles, And that would explain this decrease in functional connectivity or integration between this scale and the brain. Same thing with respiration frequency. Did I answer that question? So, Barry.
Nice talk, Asa. Just with, I was thinking about when you had this plot up earlier, are these topographical maps, are they modulated by the individual ratings of stress? Like is there an association between how stressful someone finds the arithmetic task and the degree they can do something?
Yeah, excellent question. So the actual phenomenological reports were not collected in the sample, only within the pilot. So this gradient here is a priori, theoretical. But this next data collection that we have, we did collect phenomenological reports of stress. And so the next step is to use that as the gradient or the linear predictor to see whether or not their actual accessibility to those stress feelings will affect synchrony as opposed to what we think a priori would.
Thank you so much, Asa. Let's give him a round of applause. All right, next up we'll be hearing from Surjita Kermaker, and Surjita has two main goals in her life, either to buy a house in Santa Barbara or become a master of inner peace, whichever comes first. I'm betting perhaps on the latter, not just because of the house prices in Santa Barbara. Inner peace maybe not so much today. It might be, how loud the mic, should I turn it down? Is it on? Yeah? Okay. Well, this is a test to see how calm she can stay. She might still have the upper hand with her inner peace goal, given that the way of life in her hometown of Calcutta is lad, which I'm sure I'm saying very wrong, but which roughly translates to languor and taking things slow and easy. Her hobbies such as writing poetry, playing the guitar, and watching films are already in perfect alignment with this laid-back and peaceful lifestyle. But don't get the wrong idea, as she can also crank up intensity when needed, and she's run 3 miles in 30 minutes to qualify for a trek in a Himalayan mountain. This determination and focus also translates into her research, and today we're lucky enough to hear about the fruits of some of her labor, exploring how anticipatory eye movements are influenced by gaze goals and the presence of other gazers. Please join me in welcoming Surjita.
Is it on?
Yeah.
It's on now. Is it okay? Okay.
Maybe turn it down the
Maybe
volume.
move away from the laptop. Okay. Okay. Good afternoon and welcome to my talk. Before I begin, it's kind of loud, yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Before I begin, I'd like you to look at the kid in this video for a moment. What we observe here is a deceptively simple behavior that is extremely important in social interactions and in understanding where another person is looking, their future actions, and this is called gaze following, and it is widespread in the animal kingdom.
It is thought to be an automatic process, driven majorly by overt attention shifts. It is found not just in humans and human babies, but also in non-human primates and vertebrates like birds. But don't be fooled by how simple the process looks. A lot about what the underlying mechanisms are is not well understood. One of the things that's under active research is how foveal and peripheral information is integrated to give rise to this gaze-following behavior. However, most previous work on this gaze cueing studies have used stimuli that is static in nature and simplified and artificial versions of faces or heads in isolation, eyes in isolation, and so on. The other thing is that most measures have been behavioral, such as reaction time advantages or performance accuracy advantages. But gaze following is a very visual behavior, and we use eye movements to sample our environment actively. To that end, there have been eye movement measures also, but they have again relied on simplified or artificial stimuli. For example, this is a study from, a review article from 2007 showing how these cartoon versions of faces or static images of faces have mostly been used in basic gaze cueing paradigms. So there is a need for a stimuli that is not only naturalistic and realistic, because that is better, but also dynamic, because, and as we saw in the video previously, motion itself is an important information in gaze cueing behavior. To that end, there has been a few studies that do look at gaze following with video stimuli, and our lab has also come up with a set of in-house videos of people looking at others. So if I play this one, the person in the cap is the gazer, and they do a gazing behavior towards someone who's in the observer's periphery. And these kind of videos have been used in our lab to study the fine-grained dynamics of eye movement planning during gaze following. However, the previous studies have only focused on videos where there is one peripheral goal, but real life includes multiple possible people in your surroundings. So what happens when there is increased uncertainty? By uncertainty, I just mean when you don't know who the gaze goal is. So my project is going to look at how does uncertainty affect eye movement planning in gaze cueing behavior, in dynamic gaze cueing behavior. All right, so there are three objectives of the current study. Firstly, I want to see what's the role of a dynamic gazer in programming these saccades. By saccades, I just mean very fast ballistic eye movements, like we'll see examples of that soon. Secondly, I want to see the effect of uncertainty or multiple potential gaze goals in the periphery to plan eye movements. And thirdly, when there are multiple potential people, how is there an effect of how they're arranged in space? So if the goal is closer to the gazer and the non-goal is farther from the gazer, and so on and so forth, how does that affect eye movements? The task is a very simple task. It's a visual search task for a target person, and the target remains the same person through all the trials. There are two different conditions, gazer absent and present, and both of these conditions have the three same subconditions. So either there is no gaze goal, there is no peripheral information, or there is one specific gaze goal as we saw in that video example, or there can be two potential gaze goals or increased uncertainty condition. This is how a trial progresses. This fixation cross is there to guide the observer's eyes to where the gazer will appear in the video eventually, so that the gazer is always presented foveally and everything else is in the observer's periphery. When in a gazer absent trial, it's the same exact location that the observer looks at to start with, but there is no gazer. It has been digitally deleted. We'll see examples of that soon. And in the end, they respond with on a rating scale of 1 to 10 of how confidently they thought the target was absent or present while their eye movements are recorded. There were 30 participants in the study, giving rise to around upwards of 5,000 saccades to analyze, and it was a within subjects design, so everyone looked at all the trials. So I'm going to define some terminologies here because I'm going to refer to them over and over again for the rest of the talk. So this is the gazer, and this is the gaze goal right now. The gazer is looking at the gaze goal, and this becomes what I call the gazer vector. So you can imagine that in this frame, the gazer's vector is towards the gaze goal, but it's a different vector for every frame. So it has been annotated by 13 different arrays for each frame of every video. And if the observer starts by looking at the gazer and imagine they make an eye movement that lands here, so that would become their saccade vector. If there's a third person present in the video, that's the non-goal. And importantly, you might have already noticed, the non-goal is the target in this video, and the goal is a distractor. So target distractor identity and goal non-goal identity are exclusive of each other. So target can appear as a goal or as a non-goal, and same with the distractor. And what I measured, the outcome measures are features of the first saccade. The most important outcome measure is this distance, the distance between where the saccade ended and where the actual goal is, and it's called the saccade endpoint Euclidean error. It's basically the Euclidean distance between these 2 points. And I also have the saccade angular error, and I also measure saccade amplitude and the onset latency. Onset latency just means how much time it took for the saccade to initiate from the start of the video. So coming back to the first objective, what is the role of a dynamic gazer in programming saccades? I'm going to show raw data from 10 participants to reduce clutter in the video, and this video has been slowed down to half the speed, and these are the 10 participants I moved eye positions, if I can play that again. Anyway, so what you can see is most of the people follow where the gazer is looking at, but there is a variability in where they end. And in this exact same video, if I remove the gazer, the variability in the eye movements increases. This is just a raw video, just showing you how it looks, and I've quantified that across all the videos. We'll see that later. Now this is what happens when there is one gaze goal in the periphery, and the eye movements are much less variable, they just go straight to the goal. And this is the case where the gazer is removed and there is still the goal remaining. You'll notice that the eye movements still end at the goal, but they stop somewhere in between first before moving to the goal. This plot is going to show on the y-axis is the delta, meaning the difference between the error for gazer absent versus gazer present videos. So if our hypothesis is that presence of a gazer will reduce the saccade endpoint error, or will guide the saccades better. So if our hypothesis is correct, we would observe positive values here, because gazer absent error would be higher than gazer present error. And I've plotted it across different videos, because each video had a different distance between the initial fixation and the final goal location. So across all these different video types, we should observe a positive error. But that's not what we find. We do find that kind of a trend as we expected for some videos. So each point is a video, and the error bar is across the 30 different participants. But we also find some videos that have similar errors between absent and present, gazer absent and present versions of the video. And we notice that when the distance between the initial fixation and final goal location is larger than the mean being 9 degrees of visual angle in our stimuli set, the benefit of the gazer is observed better. And so, in a post hoc manner, we divide our analysis into these two clouds of videos, so low distance versus high distance between initial fixation to goal, and that's how I will be presenting the rest of my talk. So this is, I'm going to show you some example heat maps. So that was for 10 participants, what we saw in those raw data, and this is going to show you data from all 30 participants. And this is gazer present, this is gazer absent. In both cases, I have the target present as the goal. The first column is when the gazer to the target, or the initial fixation to target distance is high. Right now it's 15 degrees of visual angle. So the x-axis is distance from the initial fixation, and y-axis is vertical distance from the initial fixation. And this is how the heat maps look. Most saccades end towards the target, near the target when gazer was present, and they are kind of undershoot when the gazer is absent. But when the gazer to target distance is low, around 5 degrees or 4 degrees of visual angle, we see that the gazer does not really affect as much, because the target is already very close to their periphery, and the heat maps look very similar. This is what we found in the scatter plot as well. Alright, I'm going to now summarize all that for all the videos instead of just example frames. And I have the first saccade endpoint error on the y-axis and the video types on the x-axis. And we see this difference, the decrease in the error for gazer present conditions is much more significant when the distance between initial fixation to goal is higher, for both when the goal was the target or the distractor. And basically 1 star is p less than 0.05, 2 star is less than 0.01, and 3 is 0.001. And these are bootstrap p-values for all these different pairwise comparisons, and FDR corrected as well. Okay, and now I'm going to talk about the onset latency. Across the board, the onset latency is higher when there is a gazer present, and that makes sense because gazer is present foveally, and if you have foveal information to process, you need more time before you can plan your next saccade. Alright, so our first question is answered. The presence of a dynamic gazer increases onset latency and decreases saccade error in the first saccade. The next question was how does uncertainty affect eye movement planning? So this, I'm repeating the first video one more time. This is when just one goal was present. Now we have two possible goals, and the the target is present here as the non-goal. We notice that the eye movements end at the target first, stay there for quite a bit before moving on. Now we were concerned whether that's because they can already tell it's the target in the periphery, or whether that's because the target is just closer to the gazer, so eye movements go there first. To get at that question, we made a swapped version of the video, so everything else is the same except the target and distractor locations are swapped. And now we see that the eye movements don't go to the target, they end at the distractor first, so they're just going to the closer person. But they don't stay at the distractor for long, they just move to the target because they're still doing the search task. This is again summarized in form of heat maps for all 30 participants. This is what we saw previously. This is when the target is present and people look at the target, but that's not because they're the target, they're just the closer person. So even if it's a distractor, people still look at them first. And now this is on the x-axis, I have 1 versus 2 goals, and we see when there are more than one goal or increased uncertainty, the endpoint error increases. And that is answering our second question. Increased uncertainty in the scene results in increased error in the first saccade when it estimates the goal location. And finally, we want to understand why that happens. Why is there an increase in the error when there is increased uncertainty? And that's basically our third question, the effect of the relative spatial configuration. By relative spatial configuration, I mean when the goal is close versus far, goal and non-goal locations from the gazer. So right now, this is an example where the gaze goal is closer, the gaze goal is the target, and the non-goal is the distractor. And we see that the people look at the closer target and they don't go anywhere else. But when the gaze goal is present farther, they don't go to the target first. They go to the non-goal, then they move to the target. And that's what's causing the increase in the error when there is more than one gaze goal. Alright, this is again the heat maps showing closer versus farther. And this is basically the increased error. And this is, I'm just going to show this for all the different subtypes of these two potential gaze goal conditions. So when the goal is target and non-goal is distractor, goal being closer, goal being farther. Again, goal is distractor, non-goal is target, closer and farther. And when there's target absent videos with the goal being closer and goal being farther than the non-goal. Across all these different subtypes, we see the general trend that when the goal is farther, the error is higher. Observers don't take the identity of the goal into account. It doesn't matter whether it's a target or the distractor. As long as the goal is closer, they move there first, or they move to the non-goal if the goal is farther. And that's exactly what's going to be summarized here. This is a contour map of the saccade endpoints registered to the goal location. So the 0, indicates the goal location registered across all different videos. And the blue map will be for the case when the goal is closer, and the red map will be for when the goal is farther. Let's focus on the blue first. We see that the saccades are located very close to the goal across all these videos. But in the red map, there is a much larger spread in where the saccades end. And that spread is not random. It's systematically around these black diamonds. The black diamonds indicate the average location of the non-goal to the left and right of the goal. So basically, the closer non-goal is what's attracting the first saccade when the goal is farther. And that answers our last question. Observers' first saccade land at the individual closest to the gazer, notwithstanding whether they're the gaze goal or the target individual. So, ending with key takeaways, humans exhibit gaze-following saccades when presented with a dynamic foveal gazer in a natural stimuli and asked to search without explicit instructions to follow gaze. Presence of a gazer helps guide the first saccade by initiating slower and longer saccades, and peripheral information also modulates the saccade strategies. So a single gaze goal increases latency and reduces error. Multiple gaze goals also reduce latency. But saccade endpoint error increases, and that happens because of the observer strategy to fixate on the closest person first. And this kind of an effect, when there is increased uncertainty, people fixate on the closer person. It's found previously in previous literature as well. For example, in a time-limited visual search task, people have found that eye movements are planned not to high probability locations, but to locations closer to the spatially closer locations, reflecting a cost minimization strategy. Another study has reported that eye movements are programmed to reduce local uncertainty as opposed to increasing global information, thus reflecting information theoretic strategies used by the brain. In conclusion, this study increases our understanding of fine-scale dynamics of eye movement programming during visual search with varying levels of uncertainty in gaze information, and extends our understanding of eye movements to more realistic scenarios. And with that, I'd like to thank my lab and my precious lab members and RAs who helped collect data. I think some of them are here. Thank you, Cassidy. And thank you for your attention.
As someone who does not study this at all, the one thing I couldn't help notice is in your scenario with the further away individual, you had the picnic table with the umbrella kind of occluding our view anyway of that individual. But in the other photo where they were sitting closer, there was nothing in front of either the distractor or the target. How much did that umbrella, because that was the first thing I looked at when I saw that scene. And I was kind of like, is there a person behind there? You know, if they are kind of hidden, how much do you think that influenced the data that you ended up collecting for that particular image?
Right. That particular image is just one of the other videos.
Yes. Okay.
Right.
Gotcha.
And in that video, there is a shadow of the umbrella that also attracts people's eye movements, not just the umbrella itself. The umbrella is the most salient part in the image for sure. But people don't look at the umbrella. If you notice the eye movements in the absence of any gazer or goal, like a completely background video with the umbrella, they still did not go to the umbrella as much as they went to the shadow of the umbrella. So yes, there are features. Natural videos will have these kind of confounding features. This is just one of those examples, and I agree.
Cool.
What happened if you wait at line? So that's the initial setup. Right. If you wait at line, or at my guess, my intuition would be you jumping between those two, because what actually happens, you pick up, you kind of notice the social interaction, right? It's not so much the object itself, but I'm interested to see the social interaction that I didn't notice before, so that I look at someone else, and so I might be jumping back and forth. And that might be different if this is not a human being. If somebody just looked at the truck, I might, take a quick look at this, but then, it's boring. I might go back and look at that video. Can you comment?
Right, yeah. So, yeah, definitely. Dynamics would differ based on what the gaze goal is. Is it a person? Is it another non-living object? And if you notice the raw data videos, they were not just the first saccade. They had multiple saccades in those videos. I analyzed the first saccade for this talk. I also looked at second and third saccades. The error reduces over the number of saccades, yes. And people do go back to the gazer if they're present. And it has been found by Nicole in our lab that the presence of a gazer helps people. If the gazer is removed suddenly, their errors increase even more. So yes, there is that kind of an interchange, yes. Yeah.
I was wondering about the explicitly not telling them anything about the gazer, and whether you think that if you did tell them something, that would be different. So just in the infant work, which you cite a little bit, it's very different because you basically get in the baby's face and you say hi baby, look, and then you look at something. So you're explicitly cueing this gazer is going to provide information that's relevant. So I wonder, I guess, if they thought the gazer was going to do something relevant, if they wouldn't have that shorter error, if they would automatically be able to move.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I ran this experiment in two different, so this is just one of the experiments. In the first experiment, I said that you follow the gaze of the gazer, instructed them explicitly. But this data is from an experiment where they were not explicitly instructed at all. They were just asked to search for a target person. So there is no information given to them that you have to follow the gaze. They do see the gazer moving their head, but we didn't instruct them. So what we see here is the spontaneous gaze following activity that emerges even without explicit instructions. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I guess I'm also interested in then what the difference is if you do tell them. So if you say follow the gaze, is it different than this?
No. So the data is very similar when we ask them to explicitly follow gaze or not. So the data from both the experiments are very similar to each other. I think that's an effect more in infants than in adults when you explicitly ask versus not mention. Okay, yeah, all right, thank you.
right, so closing us off for the day, we have Diego Gonzalez, who will be presenting research on how incubated cocaine and sucrose craving affect dopamine receptors. Diego is a dedicated jiu-jitsu practitioner who has to be extra careful in combat because he has an extra rib, which means one extra bone to potentially be broken. And Diego, however, is much more than a fighter. He also has a very strong caring side to him as well. Before pursuing his PhD, he spent 3 years working as a behavioral interventionist with children with autism. Diego's also a talented digital artist who dreams of one day completing his own comic. And for all the West Coast fast food lovers, if you're thinking about post-mini-con snacks, Diego's hometown is actually the birthplace of In-N-Out, as if anyone needed more encouragement to go to In-N-Out. But with that, let's give a warm welcome to Diego, our last speaker of the day.
All right, thank you for that introduction. So my name is Diego. If you couldn't tell by the goth attire, I'm part of Karen Simlinski's lab. And today I'm here to talk to you about incubated cocaine and sucrose craving related changes in the expression of dopamine receptors 1 and 3 within the rat medial prefrontal cortex. So the US is currently facing a psychostimulant crisis, with deaths involving cocaine use rising continuously within the past decade. This crisis not only affects our healthcare system, but it also impacts our justice system and even the environment. In terms of economic costs of substance abuse disorder, it has previously exceeded $109 billion. So despite these societal costs, and despite the fact that the use and the prevalence of use and dependence of stimulants is highest in North America, there's still no current FDA-approved treatment for stimulant use disorder. So research into the neurobiological basis of this disorder is imperative in order to develop a viable therapeutic agent. Among the most difficult of obstacles towards the long-term successful treatment of addiction-related disorders is that of relapse. Relapse is when an individual with a prior history of drug use re-engages in drug-taking behavior after a period of abstinence. The APA describes drug cravings as a strong desire for drugs, and is actually one of the criterion for stimulant use disorder in the DSM-5. So it's important to note that neutral stimuli in the environment after repeated pairings with drug use can actually develop into drug cues that themselves elicit craving. To illustrate this, say you decide to go clubbing at Wildcat. You step inside and smell the musky air with sweat and alcohol. You see the flashing night lights, and the music is blaring in your ear. You decide to have a little more fun that night and do lines of coke, as one does. And after repeated pairings of this over the year, the loud music, the pink lights, the smell of the musky air can all develop into drug cues. So the next time you step into Wildcat, you might find yourself craving cocaine. This is Tyson, Karen's dog, drooling. And you might be able to resist the temptation the first time, but what about the second time? Third time? Fourth? In actuality, resisting drug cravings becomes increasingly difficult across time. This is because the ability for drug cues to elicit drug cravings increases with the passage of time. And this phenomenon is known as the incubation of craving. We see this in both humans and in animals. If you look at the graph here, this study was conducted on humans with a history of methamphetamine use, and the bars represent differences in self-reported cravings from baseline. So in white, participants that were exposed to neutral cues did not display any changes in ratings of craving. However, the individuals who were exposed to a meth cue exhibited an increase in self-reported ratings of craving. And to note, if you look at the 6-day graph here and compare it to the 3-month graph here, we see a significant increase in these cravings. This is the incubation of craving. In rats, We also see this displayed in their behavior. So in green, we see that their baseline values when exposed to neutral cues remained low and stable across a 2-month period. However, when they were exposed to a cocaine cue, in this case, they exhibited an increase in cocaine-seeking behavior. And again, we see that this increase continued to rise across this 2-month period. So what happens in the brain when we're exposed to drug cues? Craving induced by drug cues is associated with activity within the medial prefrontal cortex, or MPFC. The MPFC has 2 distinct regions. The dorsal MPFC, known as the prelimbic cortex, is associated with drug-seeking behavior when activated. And in contrast, the ventral MPFC, or infralimbic cortex, is associated with inhibition of drug-seeking behavior when activated. I want to go into a little more detail on what happens when these brain regions are activated. So drug cues, specifically cocaine cues, induce dopamine release within the MPFC, and this release of dopamine is withdrawal dependent. So if we look on the graph here, we see that in white, rats that underwent a period of 3 days of withdrawal, or early withdrawal, displayed an approximately 150% increase in extracellular dopamine compared to baseline. However, in rats that underwent a late withdrawal period of 30 days, this increase in dopamine elicited by the cocaine cue was no longer apparent. And dopamine within the prelimbic in particular is important for cocaine-seeking behavior. We know this because an infusion of dopamine directly into the prelimbic is enough to elicit cocaine-seeking behavior. Much less is known about the infralimbic, however, as no study has previously studied this relationship. So what happens once dopamine is released into the MPFC? Dopamine binds to what is known as dopamine receptors, and there are 2 major families of dopamine receptors. D1-like receptors include D1 and D5 receptors, and activation of these D1-like receptors increases neurotransmission. Inversely, the D2-like family, which includes dopamine receptors 2, 3, and 4, instead decreases neurotransmission when activated. So, important to note as well is that in rats that had a history of cocaine use, the expression of these dopamine receptors was found to be altered across time as well. So we know that dopamine release in response to drug cues changes across time, and we know that the expression of these dopamine receptors can change across time as well. There's a high likelihood that expression of dopamine receptors is one possible mechanism for incubation of craving. For the purpose of this study, we focused on the dopamine receptors 1 and 3, and I'll talk a little bit more about follow-up plans on the other receptors at the end of my talk. I talked a lot about cocaine and dopamine. I also want to mention briefly that a history of sucrose self-administration can also produce an incubation of sucrose craving. However, unlike cocaine cues, sucrose cues don't elicit an increase in dopamine release. So it's possible that changes in dopamine receptor expression could be specific to incubated cocaine, or it could generalize to a non-drug reinforcer, sucrose. And this leads me to my research questions. 1. Is the incubation of cocaine craving associated with changes in dopamine receptors 1 and or 3 within the MPFC? And if so, do these changes in dopamine receptor expression generalize to a non-drug reinforcer, in this case sucrose, or are they specific to cocaine? You might be wondering, how do you measure craving in a rat model? I'll explain. So we utilize a self-administration paradigm. In this paradigm, rats are placed into operant chambers that contain an active lever and an inactive lever. Pressing the active lever in the cocaine study results in a presentation of a light and tone compound stimulus, as well as an infusion of cocaine into the rat's catheters that was surgically implanted. And there's also the inactive lever that, when pressed, yields no consequence. So rats underwent this self-administration training for 6 hours a day for 10 days. And following this period of self-administration, the rats began either a withdrawal period of 3 or 30 days for the cocaine study. During this withdrawal period, rats did not have access to the operant chambers or the cocaine. We also had control rats for the cocaine study that did not receive any surgery, but were still placed into the operant chambers, and instead of responding for cocaine infusions, they simply pressed the active lever and received the drug, the light and tone compound stimulus. After withdrawal period, we have a 2-hour Q test that the rats undergo. During this Q test, rats are again placed into the operant chamber, but this time pressing the active lever results in only the presentation of the light and tone compound stimulus and no infusions of cocaine. We measure the amount of active lever pressing during this Q test, and this is our measure of craving. Immediately after the Q test, rats are sacrificed, their brains are extracted, and the tissue from the prelimbic and infralimbic cortex is collected, and I run immunoblotting assays to measure dopamine receptor expression within these regions. The sucrose study is identical with the exception that no rats undergo surgery, and when placed into the operant chamber and press on the active lever, they merely receive a sucrose pellet as well as the light and tone compound stimulus. Their withdrawal day for early withdrawal is 1 day instead of 3, and the rest is the same. So here are our results for cocaine craving in the males. We did see cocaine craving. So we see here in the blue bar during withdrawal day 30, the cocaine male rats displayed an increased responding on the active lever compared to the early withdrawal cocaine rats. We also see that the control male rats did not exhibit this increase in active lever responding. However, unfortunately, we didn't see any associated changes with the incubation of cocaine craving in either the PL or IL and in either the dopamine receptor 1 or 3. For females, we saw the same thing. So we saw incubated cocaine craving as exhibited by this increase in active lever pressing during late withdrawal compared to early withdrawal. And again, the female controls did not exhibit this increase. Again, we didn't see any changes in the expression of either dopamine receptor in either region. For sucrose incubated craving, same story. We saw incubation of sucrose craving in both sexes. And again, we saw no changes in the expression of either dopamine receptor in either region. So to summarize, we saw incubation of both cocaine and sucrose craving, but we didn't see any changes in these dopamine receptors. We do plan to investigate the expression of other dopamine receptors. I already ordered the antibody for dopamine receptor 5. I have to check in on that though, because we had a situation with the freezer, see how that goes. But these results don't mean that dopamine receptors 1 and 3 are functionally irrelevant to incubation of craving. I plan to test their functionality by micro-injecting the rats with either agonists or antagonists for these receptors. You see here in the picture, this is a rat hooked up to a micro-infusion pump, and it's undergoing a micro-injection. So to end, I just want to quickly go over my current study. I'm actually going to do these micro-injections tomorrow, and I'll do them in the morning and during lunch so I don't miss the rest of you guys' talks. So if I can remind you about this graph here, during early withdrawal, we see that cues elicit increase in dopamine. So if we mimic this by administering a dopamine receptor 1 agonist, or antagonizing dopamine receptor 3, during late withdrawal, we should see a prevention of incubated craving. Inversely, if we prevent this decrease during late withdrawal pharmacologically, we should see an incubation of craving during early withdrawal. Yeah, so I'll have more on that hopefully by tomorrow. thank you all for listening to my talk. I'd like to thank everyone in my lab, including the rats. Thanks for coming. Yeah, over there.
Why did you start with the D1 and the D3? Is there something particularly relevant about them with the pain right? Because I know, so one increases neurotransmission, one decreases. Was it just any specifics on why those two in particular?
Yeah, so dopamine receptor 1 and 3 both are found on GABA interneurons that project to glutamatergic neurons that can increase neurotransmission. And dopamine receptor 3 specifically is one of the main autoreceptors.
So I had a general question about the parallels between the rodent model and the human studies, and I'm wondering if the human studies are those is the abstinence is that manipulation by the experimenter, or these people that in the real world are starting abstinence? You know what I mean?
Yeah, off the top of my head, I think it's not experimentally manipulated. I think they're just abstinent by
So if that's
on
the
their
case,
own.
wouldn't you have a separate signal? Because abstinence in the real world often follows from some bad experience,
Mhm.
and you have a negative signal, right? A negative signal is right after that happens, something happened, you go into abstinence, and now as you actually are going away from that signal, that sort of negative signal, punishment, is actually decreasing. You know what I mean? Your rodents, you're not, you didn't give them a shock, but
Mhm.
you paired and then you go into abstinence. But in the real world, if that's not manipulated by the experimenter, there might be sort of a negative signal,
Mhm.
something at the onset of the abstinence, and as you actually go away, not only there's a craving, but there's also perhaps a reduction of the negative signal. You know what I mean?
Okay, yeah, I didn't think about that, but that's a good point. Fernando?
You know, these receptors you want to treat are implicated in incubated methamphetamine craving?
No, I don't. We'll see soon enough. Yeah, so, big shout out to Fernando and Laura for doing these experiments. I was just using their tissue. Fernando and I are working on the methamphetamine project right now, so we'll see how that goes. We'll hopefully get an answer to your question. Yes, Margot? Mhm. Mhm. So in terms of expression, I'm not sure yet. Hopefully D2 is next. D4 I know less about. But I will be testing the function of both D2 and D3 because our agonist is D2, D3 agonist, so it's not just specific to either one. Ron?
So I know you didn't see any changes, but in the hypothesis, do you think these changes in expression occur during the abstinence, during these weeks of abstinence, or during
Yeah,
the
that was the hypothesis. It has to have occurred during the abstinence period, right? I don't know where else it would have occurred.
Well, I don't know, because do you think it's the response to the cue that causes that, or is it just the sitting for 3 weeks in the home page that's causing this change?
Yeah, that's a good question too. I mean, I would find it hard to believe it's in response to just the cues because that only occurs during one day. So for it to continually change across time would be kind of strange. So maybe it is just being away from the operant chamber and just being in the home cage.
I guess, I don't know if anyone has, I assume your lab has done that. Have you tested animals just 3 weeks after cocaine without any cues or anything like that?
Yes, but yes, Karen's nodding.
Yeah, we did
But-
that. That was the mGlu5 paper when Oznat was in the lab. But and no, it doesn't happen with just glutamate system, very different, right? But yeah, you guys have the same amount of cocaine. They go through withdrawal, but they never go back into the chamber, and they ain't got no changes. So it is happening in that 2-hour period in response, presumably, to the cues and lever pressing. So it's fast, relatively speaking, 2-hour thing. But who knows with the doping, because we did run those no test controls.
We have a camera that's slow.
Yeah, but they haven't had the cocaine or the methamphetamine to show that it's not just the drug experience at withdrawal. There's something about those cues that are causing rapid changes in the brain that can, yeah, and with the microdialysis, we didn't have a no cue test.
Yes.
Why did you wait 3 days to put that back into the short withdrawal and then 1 day?
Yeah, so different studies use different early withdrawal day periods. For WD3, that's what a previous study had used, so we're just replicating that. And then sometimes people use WD1 instead of WD3 because these changes in incubation occur right away. So if you start a little bit later, there's already going to be an increase, and if you're comparing it to late withdrawal, you're comparing an already increased responding rate towards the WD30 responding rate, and you're missing that period during WD1 that's lower, so you might miss a significant difference if you start later. But yeah, people vary in which withdrawal days they use. I've seen WD45 as well instead of 30.
All right, everyone, that concludes MiniCon Day 1. Thank you so much for coming out, and big round of applause to all our speakers today. We'll be reconvening tomorrow at 10 a.m. I hope to see everyone there, and we'll hear from our second round of second-year speakers, and we'll also be having our awards ceremony. Ooh. Okay, see you then.
I don't know about that, but I like it. Yeah.
How are you doing? Good.